Hello, everyone, and good morning from Korea. It is March 18th, Wednesday, here in Korea, and we are back for the sixth episode of The Connection, a podcast where I, your host, Shobra, share gaming news, esports news from Korea so that you can get a better picture of what's going on here. More so than just the tournaments and the results. Obviously, we have a lot of platforms out there that are helping cover that and share the news both from Korea and to Korea. But maybe get a better picture of the overall culture when it comes to esports or gaming, and not just limited to, gaming for the titles that are big esports, but whether it's other games in PC cafes, maybe mobile games, which are obviously huge in Korea. We share everything. So if you ever have any questions about what's going on in Korea or you've had some curiosities, feel free to leave a comment below or let me know in Twitch chat if you're watching live, and we'll be able to cover that moving forward. But as we do every week, we like to kick off the connection here by looking at the PC Cafe rankings. It's a good snapshot of what's going on in gaming in Korea. Obviously, it doesn't tell the entire story because it is limited to PC cafes, but given how popular they are and how widely they are used, it does let us know at least what's going on in terms of online games when it comes to the PC. There are rankings for mobile games separately as well, so we may begin to cover those just because it's such a huge audience. But for now, let's jump right into the PC Cafe rankings for the past week. Well, as it usually will be, and I forewarned you guys because when we first started the connection, we had a lot of kind of up and down within the top 10 because certain games had, new content releases, and I kind of gave a warning that, hey, this isn't how it's going to be. It's going to be pretty static for, quite some time before new updates come out once again, and it has been as such. Rank 1, League of Legends, that's still going strong at 47%. PUBG following after with 8%, and then it's Sudden Attack, FIFA Online 4, and Overwatch in rank 5. The other ones are also the usual culprits such as MapleStory, StarCraft, etc. But the big news, of course, is Call of Duty Warzone. And we will be talking about Warzone here in a little bit, but just as a headline, Warzone, after it came out, has jumped up in the rankings quite a bit. Well, it's categorized obviously as Call of Duty Modern Warfare. So, very, very, very little people were playing Modern Warfare in PC cafes prior. I've never had trouble finding lobbies, and I presume a lot of the people that I match up with are actually just playing at home. But it's not a game that was popularized in PC cafes, and I'm going to assume that because it wasn't targeted for that audience, it's also probably not free to play on PC cafes. You'd probably have to purchase it anyway through Battle.net. But of course, Warzone came out as a free-to-play game mode, and you could play it even if you did not own Modern Warfare. And given the download size and the graphics requirements, now this is a game that could work out quite well in PC cafes, and it did so. Last week, when they were checking it for the second week of March, PC cafes, we had about I believe, 0.1, 0.2, 0.17%, it looks like, on the rankings for Call of Duty Modern Warfare. So that's the percentage of people or playtime that Modern Warfare had in the second week of March. But then it jumped up all the way to 0.43. And I have to repeat this every time we talk about the PC cafes. These numbers seem very small, but like outside of rank 1, maybe 2, all the numbers matter quite a bit. If you're in the top 50, you're a game that you can talk about and people will know, right? If you're in the top 20, it's a game that people are actually playing quite a bit, et cetera, et cetera. So what does that mean? From 0.17 to 0.43, a better perspective perhaps is that now it has jumped quite a bit in the actual rankings, from being ranked 34th in the second week of March in playtime all the way up to 18th in the past week, and pretty much purely because of Warzone's release. Again, this now allows all these people who don't play Call of Duty at all to join in, try this new Battle Royale. There's a lot more I want to talk about for Call of Duty Warzone, but we'll get to that in just a second, because I know some of you out there are huge fans of Path of Exile and Diablo 3, and you'll be happy to know that those games kind of reclaimed some of their rankings as well with the new updates and the new season starting, and both have risen quite a bit. Path of Exile actually jumping up all the way back into the top 20. Diablo 3 still going strong at rank 15. From my experience, I think Diablo still holds a bigger player base here in Korea, and maybe even in the West, just because obviously it was earlier, and also it's simpler, right? From my personal experience as well. Not to say that one is better or worse, but Path of Exile, part of the, I think, charm is how deep you can go into builds and things like that. I never had a chance to really get into it because I got interested in Path of Exile too late, and I never found a group to really play it with. So I've tried to get into it like 3 times, and every time I get really excited, and then like 2 days in, I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing, and I kind of give up. But both of those games, obviously, a very similar genre, a very similar system on the surface, and they've both been doing quite well with their new season starting off. So you'll be happy to know, because obviously Diablo has a deep history in Korea as well. They're doing well. Path of Exile, of course, not to say that it's not popular in Korea. I think a lot of people interested in that genre of RPG have been growing into it in Korea as well. And of course, as I always mention, the development of streaming and other content pieces has helped popularize certain games as well. Those are really the big notes for the PC Cafe rankings. Really, it's the Call of Duty headline. Nothing else has really changed much. Any of the games that have dropped in ranking are more or less because games like Call of Duty, Diablo, and Path of Exile have come up, and as a result have pushed other games a little bit lower into the rankings. We'll have to keep an eye on Call of Duty, though, because again, the big test is after week 1. Week 1, you can have the hype, right? It's free to play. People are streaming it. There were partner streamers that were streaming it, and everyone tries it, right? But we'll see how it goes, especially because going to PC cafes is a little bit iffy in these times because of the coronavirus. And that we'll talk about that more later, because there's actually some controversy around the PC cafes right now when it comes to the coronavirus. But let's move on to Call of Duty Warzone. So, how was Warzone received in Korea? Obviously, it was received very well within the Call of Duty community in the West, the people who already have been playing Call of Duty, and it was actually received quite well from other players who were big names in battle royales, whether it's pros or mostly streamers, right, who were pretty invested in other battle royales. I've seen them even change their mind. Initially, they were a little wary of what Warzone offered because it is very different, right? It plays very differently. The charm is different, right? The benefits are different, and the playstyle is very different from a lot of those other battle royales out there. So I think some people were wary, and we've seen some big names actually change their mind over the course of the week and saying, actually, I've given it more of a chance, and now I'm really digging it. So the response has been, I would say, fairly positive. There are bugs, and there are some complaints. Like you've seen me talk about the loadouts quite a bit if you follow me on social media. So there's definitely topics at hand for discussion. But again, overall reception has been quite positive in the West from what I can tell. Well, how is it in Korea? The good news is it does seem quite positive. People who have played it seem quite excited for the gameplay. A lot of the news articles that covered Warzone have comments stating that really it's a game that people should give a chance because it feels really good. Some people saying, you say what you want, but Call of Duty has always felt good in terms of the gunplay and kind of the feedback you get when you're getting kills and, getting your scores up. And so it was good to see that the Korean audience is, I guess, aware of the pluses that Call of Duty as a brand has always had, but now Warzone offers in a very different way. Now, the problem is really the hackers, right? And this is something I mentioned briefly before when we've talked about Apex Legends in comparison to some other games. Hackers are a problem, obviously, in any game in any region, and especially more so for free-to-play games. Now, I can't speak for every other region, but generally, the general consensus is that they are usually a bigger issue in Asia than they are in the States, especially for free-to-play games. Hacks are just sometimes more readily available, and obviously the laws and whatnot surrounding all of that just differ, right? The market differs, the audience differs, and so we've seen hacks be quite a big problem in a lot of battle royales. I mean, PUBG had a lot of issues with it in China. as like a headline that I think even they had mentioned for a little bit. Um, and then obviously Apex Legends got hit pretty hard, where a lot of the Korean audience actually just kind of fell out from the game because they just couldn't deal with it, on top of some other complaints that they had had initially about the game. And with Warzone, I'm already seeing a lot of posts in the community saying, similar to, so one thing that really struck me was one person was posting, hey, I tried the game. I really liked it. And I was like, okay, this is fun. Maybe I'll even buy the battle pass and grind it, because this is a game that I can really enjoy. But then I started running into hackers. And if there are already this many hackers in week one, like, I don't want to spend money on this game. I don't want to keep playing it. And a lot of people kind of agreeing with that. Some people saying, well, hacks exist in any game, etc. But others saying, yeah, I've had similar experiences in other free battle royales or FPSs. And that's a big shame. Obviously, a lot of the responses also come in with people saying, well, we're all in one server, so like a lot of my lobbies in Warzone seem to be majority Chinese players, and then the percentage of hackers seems to just be kind of correlated, which it's not necessarily a true statistic, but knowing how these marketplaces often work in different countries in Asia, we can only imagine that maybe there's a better chance that you're running into someone that is hacking. I actually ran into someone that we found proof that they were hacking, because after they killed me, we were observing, because it was sketchy, and we observed them, and they were literally scanning every wall and ceiling whenever they walked into a room. So, so that was pretty apparent that they were hacking, and unfortunately, like that. So here's what happens, right? That person that killed me, that was a hacker, was using a Chinese flag as their calling card, and their name was Chinese. And so now in my head, I'm like, oh, great, a Chinese player using hacks. And knowing what we know of the news and the media and what the coverage is about hacking in Chinese servers and in games in China, that continues to feed this headline of, oh, there are like just way more hackers in China. Honestly, I'm starting to wonder if maybe it's just like a percentage thing, because the population is just more, and etc. But all that aside, all the stereotypes aside, even if not for just like all the regions being under one Asian server or being able to connect to the same lobbies, it's definitely something that is pretty big. It's a pretty big issue. And again, it really just comes down to, there's just so many other games you can play, so many other options, and a lot of times Koreans are just impatient enough that the people who are kind of waiting for the long run in games aren't as many as I feel they are in the West, right? They're not as determined, because, and it comes down to several things. In my opinion, one is actually the population is just smaller in Korea, right, compared to the US, or if you're looking at Europe as a whole, if the gaming communities kind of work together, it's just way smaller, right? There's just less people. So if you say, okay, well, 1% of people are holding out for this game to get better, and they're just passionate because of the game itself, and they love the lore or whatever else it might be, that 1% might be able to continue to hold decent conversations on a subreddit in the West. But now the number, when you transfer it to the Korean population, suddenly just gets a lot smaller. And so that community has a lot of a harder time sustaining itself by encouraging each other and providing content. So I think that's one thing. And the other thing is, we've talked about this in the past on other episodes, Koreans are actually generally pretty impatient with a lot of different things. And especially when it comes to gaming and the internet, when there's so many other things that work so well, I think the default is, okay, well, if it's not working, right? If it's not working for me, I'll just do something else, right? I'll play a different game. I'll use a different platform. I'll go back to what I'm used to. I'll go back to a game I've already invested money in. And it's just a much easier and quicker switch for a lot of people in Korea, I feel, than when it comes to the Western audience. Now, the time when this changes is, again, if you can target the PC cafe culture, right? So if you're targeting the social aspect, then that changes everything, because maybe and it's the same in the West, right? If you have friends to play with, maybe you didn't like it in the beginning, or maybe it's too hard to learn, but your friends continue to invite you and you're playing, and that's, sometimes maybe even some of you feel like, oh, well, I have to play this game because otherwise I don't get to spend time with my friends. But then maybe the game grows on you, and that's your way in. And it's the same in Korea. If you can target that aspect, if you can target the aspect of play this game when you come to the PC cafe, and now you're targeting the people who already like the game to invite their friends, that changes the whole game plan. But currently, we're not seeing that yet. We're not seeing any headlines on any marketing initiatives when it comes to PC cafes or social aspects in Korea. I believe so. Out of all the different Korean streamers I sometimes tune into to see what they're doing, only like the biggest one on Korean Twitch was, I think, officially sponsored as a Modern Warfare or Call of Duty partner to stream Warzone. So there's that. A lot of other people have been trying it on stream for sure as the game came out recently, but so I don't know if there's as much focus here. So my only concern, as someone who's enjoying the game, as someone who's obviously been very invested in the Call of Duty franchise for quite some time, is, quite frankly, Call of Duty is not a franchise that has to focus on the Korean audience. It just doesn't, right? The numbers just don't add up. You can say what you want about Korea being the mecca of esports and everything else, but first of all, the Call of Duty League is pretty content with just being in the West for now, and the numbers are so big in the West when it comes to both esports and basic player base, or the common player base, that they don't have to put in extra investment to try to capture the Korean audience. It's just not worth it. I can see that from where I'm sitting, so I can only imagine with the extra data they have, how apparent that may be. So with that said, should they be as concerned as about, hey, should we separate these servers maybe for some audiences? Should China be in a different server, or should every country have a different server? Probably not, because then the player base won't be big enough. But what do we do about hacking in this free-to-play mode? Actually, one thing that some of the Korean community mentioned was, hey, well, it's no surprise that there are hacks available already, because you could just use hacks that were developed for Modern Warfare, which is something I hadn't considered, right? So the, I guess, availability of hacks for Warzone is actually much more and much earlier than a lot of other free-to-play games, because the engine and everything else is actually based on a pre-existing game. It's just an extra game mode. So my concern is there's not really an incentive for Infinity Ward and Activision to put a lot of focus on how to deal with this issue in Korea and Asia. But if so, how long is the player base going to last when it comes to a new battle royale in Korea? And it's a shame, because I go into the different Warzone communities, and there's people, marketing their own Discord channels or other social channels where you can gather together and party up and discuss strats. People are asking for different loadout builds, and they're recommending their own builds, and I see a lot of posts, a lot of posts of people just being like, hey, I'm new to Warzone, I'm new to Call of Duty, who would like to party up and help me learn the game? And that's such a hotbed of growing a community, and yet, the people who are experienced with it, or the people who have been playing maybe Call of Duty for a while, are like, well, this mode now just has too many hackers, right? And if that disconnect happens, you're never going to capture these people who are trying the game and want to get better. So yeah, so this was a bit of a personal rant, because obviously I want the game to continue to flourish. I wish it will continue to have, very populated lobbies, even if it's not, the biggest game, right? That it's there, that it's available, and that people are able to enjoy it together. But I've just seen too many games die out very, very quickly in Korea. So we will have to wait and see. It's really going to come down to, I think, by the end of the first month, right? So by the end of March, where does Call of Duty lie in the PC cafes, and where does it lie in the community? Are the communities still active? Are there still a lot of posts coming up? Are there a lot of new players coming in? And if not, then we'll see that maybe it can't last as much in Korea. So we'll have to see. But again, the good news is it seems that the general consensus, even in Korea, is that the game feels good, right? People are happy with the gunplay, the movement, and so that's promising. That is promising. It's not like they have complaints about, this game doesn't feel good for what we're used to. We're not seeing a lot of comments about that. So we will have to see if people kind of fight through the initial wave of hackers and if they're able to last it out. So that was our headline on Call of Duty Warzone, which of course has been taking over the gaming world by quite a bit. We want to cover a couple other news headlines that came up in the past week. Obviously not everything, as we do want to move on to talking about the PC cafes and how they're affected by the coronavirus currently. But let's look at a couple headlines over here. So we had a couple, not controversial. I mean, you could take it controversial in a controversial manner, but more so headlines that. Oh, I apologize. Those are my warnings for different updates on the virus here in Korea. But different headlines and I guess news items and updates that people can discuss when it comes to business strategy and game marketing. So one is, I've mentioned the game Counterside before in Korea. It's a mobile game developed by Nexon, or published by Nexon. And now Counterside is a mobile game. You do like the daily quests, and I think it's kind of similar to Arknights in how it works, but it's not pure tower defense. I think it's a little bit more RPG. I haven't had a chance to try it yet myself, but the problem is the game's been released, and then they did their first kind of big event, right? And it's like the spring event, because spring is starting now, and so they did an event in game where you can acquire, I guess, new characters and new skins. And as it goes with a lot of content events, the question now is this kind of predatory when it comes to finances? Is it predatory when it comes to microtransactions? And I can only base it off of what I'm reading on the news about what is actually happening. And it seems like the very baseline of content is available by playing through the game and partaking in these quests. But there's also different tie-ins to obviously microtransactions and putting real money into your account in the game. Now the problem is Nexon generally has a history of being known for overdoing microtransactions in a lot of their games. So some of the immediate reactions seem to be from the community that Nexon just needs to stop. They need to stop taking this as their main business model, because otherwise their games will eventually all die out. But I think it's not affecting the player base currently, as far as I can tell. The player base itself was already not necessarily the most stable, just because people were not as confident in the changes from beta to release and other things. But therefore, maybe this event is a little bit ill-timed. But as of now, it's really just that they've launched a new event, and Nexon has a history of implementing too many microtransactions, and we'll see if that creates a fallout. The game is very young. It has obviously been released this year, so hopefully they're able to manage it a little bit better to make sure that it continues if they want the game to grow. Another one that came up is actually Counter-Strike Online, which, for those of you guys who don't know, Counter-Strike Online was developed in Asia as the Counter-Strike spinoff to be played and compete with games like Sudden Attack instead of Counter-Strike Global Offensive. So, which I think CSGO is actually now kind of making a return and entry into the Korean market. Very, very weird. I guess CSGO has been growing consistently anyway globally, so maybe it's just tied into that. But Counter-Strike Online, if you're playing CS in Korea, you usually mean Counter-Strike Online. And so Counter-Strike Online actually did a partnership with Kingdom, or I guess Kingdom 2, which is a Korean drama on Netflix. I haven't watched it, but I believe it's about zombies, but in like ancient Korea, right? So you've got like the cool backgrounds of the old days of Korea, but now it's like zombie apocalypse-ish. So it's very, very popular among the Korean audiences, and I think quite a few people who are just interested in Korean content as well, especially because it's available on Netflix. But Counter-Strike Online, put out a teaser as Kingdom 2 is releasing on Netflix. And so they've now decided that they're, I guess, creating new maps and some content around Kingdom, or based around, I guess, the theme of Kingdom. So basically, ancient Korea in the game. So, I mean, it's cool. I was kind of surprised to see that this was coming from Counter-Strike Online instead of maybe some other games. But it is cool to see that there's that partnership, and we'll see if that helps maybe bring some more eyes to Counter-Strike as a brand itself in Korea. Moving forward, we do have news from PUBG. Actually, there's going to be a friendly tournament between China and Korea for PUBG. There is prize money involved. I think the payout is comes out to about 4,000 USD for the winning team. So it's not for the prize money. It's not a huge amount of money, but it's a bit of an event match, a show match between Chinese teams and Korean teams. 16 teams will be competing. It's actually happening this weekend. And it will start at 6 p.m. each day for KST, for Korean time. Africa TV seems to have gotten exclusive partnerships, so they will be the exclusive broadcasters to cover the event for the Korean audience. But from Korea, it's teams like Genji, OG Enentus, and the top 6 teams that have, or the teams that were in the top 6 for PGS for the Korean qualifiers. So those teams will be going up against, it sounds like, 8 teams from China, where they'll play on a point system right over 3 days. And I think it's like 18 matches? Wait, suddenly when I said that sounds very, very high. It is 18 matches. So 18 matches where it's cumulative points. It's cool to see that this is happening. Unfortunately, because of, even in Korea, you can't escape some of the negative bias when it comes to the virus. So some reactions to this news were like, wow, you're doing a friendly match with China during these times. And again, I hope we can kind of get away from that, right? One of the benefits of esports and gaming is that we can cross borders and overlook maybe some of these things that are affecting us differently. I don't want to get into, the politics of all of that, but I think the most important thing when it comes to the virus right now is, regardless of, mistakes that different governments have made, and I don't think really, there's that many governments that can boast that they've done everything perfectly when it comes to handling the virus so far. Obviously if it's going to affect your policies and, how you go forward, that's fine. Keep it in mind, discuss it as you need to, but let's not get into a blame game, right, unnecessarily. So I just want to keep that in mind. But for everyone who is interested, there is going to be this event match. I'm going to assume there's no English coverage because obviously it's just Chinese and Korean teams. But if you wanted to just see the gameplay, you would be able to go to Africa TV over the weekend and see the Korean coverage as they're watching the 8 teams from Korea go against the 8 teams in China in PUBG. A little bit of a, I guess, ray of sunshine for all you fans of Ragnarok, the age-old RPG from Korea, is that Ragnarok Origin is coming out in Korea, so I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, in Korea in Q3. So this is another mobile version of Ragnarok, although I guess not just a straight-up remake, I don't think. Because they do have Ragnarok M, which is also the other mobile version of Ragnarok. But it sounds like they want to distinguish it a little bit from Ragnarok M, aside from the fact that they're both on mobile, by making Ragnarok Origin a little bit more focused on the online portion and benefits that the original Ragnarok had. So that's what they've been focusing on. So probably more social interaction, probably more online interaction, party play, and things like that. Personally, I'm a little bit excited for this. I haven't tried Ragnarok M, but it's been a very long time since I've even taken a look at Ragnarok. When Tree of Savior was announced as kind of the spiritual successor, I got really into it in the States. But when I was trying it was when there were still a bunch of connection issues and a lot of other bugs. So I just didn't have the time to really commit to it. But if this turns out to play quite well, this might be one of those games, again, that really gets me to open my eyes up to mobile gaming a little bit more in my personal time as a hobby. So we'll keep an eye on that. Again, it's a release for Korea in Q3. So, whether that gets released globally afterwards, we'll have to keep an eye on it. For those of you who follow Korean RPGs, you know that sometimes that can take a while. So be patient, hold strong, and hopefully if the game is good, it goes that route. And if it's bad, you just didn't have to deal with it. And then you can just see the reviews and how it happens in Korea and then move on to another game. But hopefully, Ragnarok is a very, very loved brand for those of you guys who don't know a lot of MMORPGs, especially from Korea. So I think a lot of people are quite excited for this. Of course, with the development of mobile gaming, it sounds like they're really pushing for better graphics and just a more polished game when it comes to Ragnarok Origin. I've seen a little bit of the gameplay that they showed at G-Star last year, so I am actually excited. This is one of the very few mobile games where I'm actually excited about it before it comes out. But we'll wait. It's Q3, so it's still a little whiles away. And we have, I would say, 2 or 3 more headlines before we get to talking about PC cafes. One will be familiar news and maybe some sad news, depending on who you're a fan of, in League of Legends. So if you follow League of Legends, especially the LCS in North America, you'll know that Crown, the former mid laner for CLG, has now left the team. They have parted ways. Of course, they just weren't performing that well. Of course, CLG had a big headline with the return of Pobelter to the mid lane, and Pobelter has entered the CLG roster. And since then, after I guess some talks, Crown has now departed ways, or parted ways rather, with CLG. Those of you who don't know, Crown made a huge name for himself when he first came onto the scene. Even when the news was covered that Crown was returning to Korea after parting ways with CLG, people in the comments were like, Crown's the guy who made Faker cry, right? Crown was, at the time, known as like the best mid laner during that time, really a superstar that was ready to rise, but maybe kind of stunted a little bit because of, how he grew from that point on. Some people in the comments saying, maybe it's just because he didn't grow to diversify his champion pool a lot. There's a lot of speculation, of course. We will, as viewers, we can't always say exactly what the reason is. But it's good to see a lot of people still kind of cheering Crown on, and a lot of people just saying, I hope, he's able to just get the rest he needs and then overcome this and return in good form, because he was such a, I guess, potential superstar. And not able to do that. People are kind of reminiscing about the great times that he's shown, the great highlights he has shown, and so a lot of fans just saying, "Listen, don't be down on yourself. Take this as a moment to turn around, and hopefully we can see you back in good form." Some people, of course, being a little bit brutal and maybe brutally truthful, and saying, "Yeah, but after this, like, how do you try to compete in Korea again, right? Especially with all these other mid lane players that are now back at the top and vying for number 1 spot against Faker, or even potentially playing better than Faker in certain games." So there's a bit of a mix, but I think the consensus, one person seemed to round it up quite well in the comments when when the news was broken yesterday, saying, "Listen, regardless of what you think, you can't really say anything bad about the efforts he's shown throughout his career," which I think is fair. And so hopefully Crown is able to pick himself back up and return to the scene in some ways. It still looks like he has quite a lot of fans in Korea who are waiting for him to be able to return to the scene. And we'll have to wait and see. Obviously, right now, LCK also currently on break because of the virus. We just got news, of course, LCS and LEC will be returning, I believe, this weekend, right, in an online format. And so for League of Legends fans, your esports is returning. Rejoice. But for Crown fans, let's hope that he is able to take the time he needs and then return, hopefully in better form, to the scene. Or maybe, in a different capacity and not as a player. But for now, Crown will be returning to Korea. now we're starting to get into the coronavirus portion of our podcast, as I think it will continue to be for quite some time while the world is dealing with the virus, and we always get new updates on how it's impacted things in different regions. Well, when it comes to gaming in Korea, we've got some good news, we've got some bad news. So the first one, and this one, just hear me out till the end, because I know those of you who are fans of Pokemon Go might get a little upset when I first introduce the piece of news. But so that I have to chuckle a little bit, because I'll translate the title for you first. So the headline for this news article goes, "In times like these," and then Pokemon Go encouraging outdoor activity through new event. Right? So it's a bit they're kind of, it's a snide remark, right? They're taking a look at Pokemon Go and being like, how could you encourage outdoor activity during times like these? So they have a screenshot of the announcement of the new event from March 20th to March 23rd, so over the weekend, where so I haven't played Pokemon Go in a while, but I guess there's now there's a higher chance of running into certain Pokemons that maybe you couldn't find as well before. And then obviously you can still hatch your eggs by walking. That's always been a mechanic in Pokemon Go, etc. And so the article goes on and says, right now we're in a time when companies are still either encouraging or requiring people to work from home, and the nation is telling people to stay home as much as possible. But meanwhile, Pokemon Go is telling people to go outside, and how could they? Now, the comment section immediately has fans from Pokemon Go being like, "Listen, this isn't a fair article, and there's bias here, because Pokemon Go also canceled all these events that were focused on gatherings." Because I know, and this I've known even in the very beginning, but I guess they've had these throughout, where Pokemon Go has events where you have to gather in large groups to like a certain area. I think sometimes it's raids, and maybe sometimes it's other like social events, but it drives people into a concentrated area, and you can meet other Pokemon Go players there and interact in the game and both outside and a lot of that. But because of coronavirus, they actually canceled a lot of these events in the beginning of March, and I had heard about that from some of my other friends who are fans of Pokemon Go as well. And so despite that, they're now taking this activity and saying, like, how could they be encouraging this? Now, I'm not really sure how to take this, because here's the thing. Yes, obviously social distancing is very important right now. But if you're keeping that social distance, also like getting sunlight and stuff like that is very important as well. I think the problem is how it really just comes down to how you interpret this, right? If you're like, okay, well, so when it comes to, I guess, the Pokemon spawning in different areas, I guess it really just comes down to where they're spawning, right? If they're spawning in like subway stations and things like that, where there still are a lot of people, because there are workplaces where you can't work from home, like hospitals or banks, things like that. Maybe that's a bit of a problem. But if it's kind of just out in the wild and you're taking a walk around your neighborhood, kind of keeping distance from people, or in hours where maybe not as many people are taking walks, because a lot of us now have a little bit more free or flexibility when it comes to our timetable during the day, I don't know if you can really blame the game, because the game's always had that mechanic, right? It's not like they added this new mechanic of walking outdoors like during the time of coronavirus. Like, that's actually like literally the game is catch and then walk with your phone on you. Like that is how the game has always been. So I agree that the headline was definitely a little bit sensationalist. It was a little bit biased. I think if the article was more something like, hey, Pokemon Go is continuing to do this, obviously they've put in their efforts to cancel certain events, but always keep in mind the importance of social distancing, that would be a different story, which I think is a good way to do it, right? So don't overdo it because you want these new Pokemon. And I guess I I'm assuming this event is global. So for those of you listening, if you do play Pokemon Go, don't be like, oh, well, now, like, less people on the street, so I'm going to go everywhere I want. And, still, make sure if you have to, sneeze, like sneeze into your elbow and things like that. Like, practice what you need to for your hygiene and social distancing to keep other people safe in case, you're a carrier or someone else is a carrier. But, I've also been telling people, unless your neighborhood or town has demanded you, like, actually fully quarantine and lock down, or there's a curfew, taking light walks, right, is important, both for your health, your both physical and like mental health. When you're doing so, again, practice the social distancing and personal hygiene that you need to. But I don't want people to misunderstand kind of what we need to do during these times. So yeah, so I think this article was a little bit in bad taste. Some people are asking for the article to be taken down. I doubt it will be, because the article is actually posted on the 14th and it's still up. So I think it's just there. I don't think it's really going to change too many people's opinions. But I think the consensus is, the article is perhaps phrased a little poorly. Maybe Pokemon Go should have taken a different approach. And I think that's fair. I think being a little bit constructive criticism can go a long way. So again, I think it's because if you're already practicing good social distancing and hygiene, you're reading this event and being like, okay, so I do have to walk, but maybe certain areas I won't go and things like that. But the game is at, I guess what the news article is saying correctly is the game is encouraging you to go outside, which at that point it just comes down to whether you're practicing that time outside properly or not. And I guess the game's not taking responsibility for that. So there is some discussion to be had there. I don't know. So my personal take is I do think the article is a little sensationalist. I think it's a little biased, but at the same time, maybe there should have been some extra caution or even a further change in the event itself. I can only speak to that extent because it seems like there's a lot of discussion on the actual technicality of the event and what it requires, like how much you need to be outside or where you need to go or if you need to be with other people. So maybe there's more to look into that. But as I don't play Pokemon Go, I don't want to speak on that without the full background just yet. Now, for all the things that are going on with the coronavirus, obviously we've seen many companies and many services now kind of opening up their services for free or, just for the time period, or expanding like server capacity and things like that. We've seen that with Discord and some other services that people use, whether it's for social interaction or business. And some similar things have happened in Korea as well. In fact, Smilegate Stove and the Stove VR, which is the platform for the VR store that they have under Smilegate, has actually been waiving fees for their service fee. And then they've also had people from Stove VR that they've actually now got partners to participate where they are decreasing and covering the publishing cost of putting games up onto their platform, VR services and games up onto their platform. So because, again, this virus is affecting everything on top of health, right? It's affecting economy, it's affecting development, and a lot of different things because people have to work from home or, other limitations. It's good to see, different companies and services now trying to help each other out and saying, well, we'll cover this part so that, again, the economy itself can still continue, right? The marketplace itself can still continue. So that was very, very, very cool to see that they are keeping that open, especially when it comes to VR, because actually, now that I think about it, as I'm sharing this news, VR is something that can really grow further, like during these times of quarantine, on top of just gaming and other online services. So allowing those services to continue instead of actually shut down, because obviously it requires a lot of technical attention, is very, very cool to see. Well, we've slowly been talking more and more about the coronavirus, and now to get to the big headline of the day, it's the PC cafes. Now, I think we're now at a point in time around the world where most people have been impacted quite strongly by the virus one way or another, right? Maybe you've been told to work from home now. Maybe your city is under a lockdown, or maybe you haven't been able to get in touch with certain services, or certain services have gone down because whether it's their workplace or more people are trying to use it, and so now your daily cycle has been impacted just a little bit. With that awareness in mind, when you think about PC cafes, I think, hindsight 2020, most people will now agree, okay, that seems like a bad place to go. But, unfortunately, not everyone always thought that in the beginning. I mean, personally, for instance, I've talked about on stream how, I really miss going to karaoke, even if it's on my own. But ever since the first outbreaks happened in Korea, I was like, probably not the best place to go sticking a mic into my face that other people have been shouting into, right? You just don't know. So I've been avoiding that, but while usage of PC cafes has definitely dropped since the coronavirus was first discovered in Korea, it wasn't stopped, right? PC cafes are still open, karaoke shops are still open, and now there's actually been some cases that are directly tied to being spread within a PC cafe. So again, let's be very clear. When you see these news like, hey, virus was, or person who was confirmed for the virus seems to have contracted it when they were here, or they might have spread it to other people in a location. This does not mean like this isn't an excuse to suddenly attack those services or locations, okay? There's a different story for, hey, should they be under lockdown? That's a whole different conversation. But I want to be very clear. This doesn't suddenly mean for people to be like, PC cafes cause the coronavirus. Like that's not how it works, right? They are very, very prone to spreading the virus. And here's why. In case you haven't been to a PC cafe. So PC cafes, they have gotten better than they have in the past, right? They're how do I want to say this? The facilities are a lot better. They're cleaner. They're bigger. In the past, they were a lot smaller. So you have a little bit more space. Some of them have the mini dividers in between seats, so you're not seeing like flashing lights from another monitor bother you, and things like that. But at the end of the day, you're sitting right next to someone on a different computer. You're using a mouse and keyboard with your hand that other people have used. And honestly, what do you do when you play games? All your common habits, unconscious habits come out. Maybe you're touching your face, you're brushing your hair, you're brushing your hand through your hair and whatnot, and maybe you sneezed into your elbow, but it's such a confined space. And on top of that, oftentimes you're like using headsets, and they have headsets at most PC cafes, or you can ask for one. And sometimes, a lot of times these days, they all have at least the baseline gaming headsets with mics that you can use. So now you're shouting into the microphones and people are shouting right next to you. And so when you put all that into context, this is like actually a place where you can just easily spread viruses. Not even just the coronavirus, like just everywhere, right? People are shouting and spitting and I don't know, coughing and sneezing and touching keyboards and mice, and you're in a confined space. And usually most PC cafes are either in basements or even upstairs. They cover up all their windows, which I can only assume is a similar philosophy to casinos, where you don't want people to really realize how much time has passed. I don't know, but that's just how they've been developed. So there's like not great ventilation. Again, things have gotten better. In the past, like you could just smoke in PC cafes, like back in the old days. And so it was really, really bad. But these days, most places you actually can't smoke at all inside, or they have like separate smoking booths. And the ventilation has gotten better, as, it's always, PC cafes have always come up as an issue now and then as a cycle in Korea, just because it's such a widely used place, especially for young teens and young adults. But at the end of the day, like even outside of Corona, it's actually a place where you can spread a lot of different viruses. Like it's just there, right? Whether it's even just the common cold. So it's a place where you have to be pretty aware of your own actions, and also how that might impact others, or how you might be impacted by things you just never thought about. Well, the problem really comes up that recently there was a case within Seoul. So for those of you who aren't aware of what's going on with the coronavirus in Korea, I know from the outside, a lot of people are looking at Korea and being like, oh, okay, well, Korea seems to have things pretty under control. The spread is slowing, which is true. And it seems like they're flattening the curve quite a bit, which so far has been true. But also just recently, there were new confirmed cases in Seoul that weren't directly tied to the people who were in Daegu during the original outbreak or even China. So now there's a little bit of alert within Seoul being like, okay, this is actually the real test now that we have all these services in place and we have this infrastructure in place to test and to quarantine, and these new cases have now popped up. We have to make sure that this doesn't spread. Unfortunately, one of the new cases, the person had gone to a PC cafe, and now actually, when was this headline? This was over yesterday, actually. So, or day and a half ago, there were 2 extra cases in Seoul that were now tied directly to that same PC cafe. So when they found the first confirmed case, they went ahead and got a list of all these people who visited that PC cafe during that time. And now these 2 new cases came up of people who went to that PC cafe. Now, unfortunately, it also sounds like there were other people tied to that case that have also gone to karaoke. So now you gotta like exponentially test people, right? Because there's all these people that pass through. But with these 2 new cases, it appears that they're still trying to test everyone that has gone through that specific PC cafe, because there's just so many more tie-ins that can happen. And now that original case and the spread has now gone from 1 person to 26 people within a couple of days. And since March 15th, they've tested 592 out of the 934 visitors during that time. And now at that one PC cafe. And then they're trying to test an extra 135 people that they think are probable to being exposed to the virus. And they're also doing everything they can to reach out to the last 207 that they haven't been able to get in touch with yet. So that's 1,000 people that have gone through that one PC cafe. And it's crazy to me because we've heard that PC cafes have definitely lost traffic since the virus, and yet there is still 1,000 people. I don't know exactly what the time frame they're testing is maybe only since that confirmation and afterwards, like since their visit and afterwards, but so maybe it's probably less than a week. But anyway, they're trying to test all 1,000 people that they have a list of, and trying to get in touch with those that they haven't been able to just yet. Now the question comes in is, does this mean PC cafes have to be shut down? I don't know how the government will react to all that. I mean, to be honest, aside from Daegu, and so I got notices, I think about 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, for certain blocks or certain buildings in Seoul being locked down because of confirmed cases. So I've gotten notices for that. But for instance, I live within Seoul, and we haven't had like a citywide lockdown, right? We haven't had a citywide quarantine. Certain local businesses in my neighborhood have been closed to cut costs, or they close earlier, or they've limited their services. But my neighborhood is also a lot of banks and hospitals, so local hospitals. So there's a lot of people that still work here. So a lot of the restaurants and cafes are still open. Sometimes I see, even a lot of people like going on dates to these cafes, which, I mean, maybe that you can curb a little bit, but people are getting takeout, people are eating in these restaurants and leaving. And things like that. So it's gotten quieter, right? We don't have as many visitors like coming to go to these cafes or restaurants that might be known, a little bit more well known and popular. But again, it hasn't been a ghost town, to put it lightly, or to put it simply. Not lightly. That's pretty serious, actually. That's the wrong phrase. I apologize. To put it simply, Seoul hasn't been a ghost town yet. It hasn't required the government hasn't required a like citywide lockdown yet. I know that Daegu has experienced something similar to that during the initial outbreak. I think slowly opening up now. But Seoul, it's been very, very localized to different neighborhoods or different buildings. And now, as we start to see issues with these services, and people are starting to be a little lax in Korea, which I've noticed. And how I've noticed is so I forget if I talked about this last week. I think I did. Face masks are just more common in Korea and a lot of parts of Asia, even without the coronavirus going around, right? Like if the air is bad, wear a face mask. If there's a bad flu going around, wear a face mask. If you have a cold, definitely wear a face mask. And so it's very common. So it's a very good gauge of like how much people are aware, right? Outside of the conversation of how helpful is it actually, it's just a very good gauge of how much awareness is going on. And so during the high point of the Daegu outbreak and Korea kind of being on edge, like literally everyone on the street, and there weren't as many people on the streets, but literally everyone had a mask. Everyone had a mask. Everyone was like taking care of their mask very carefully if they had to take it off. It was just widely known. And then I just noticed even in the last week, like if I go out to the store to, stock up a little bit more or get something extra, I see a lot of people now walking around without masks. And again, I want to emphasize this. Knowing how easy it is for Korean people to use masks, knowing how lightly they think of masks, right? They don't think like, oh, if I wear a mask, it means that they're like, it's not tied to a pandemic. So it's a very easy step for Koreans to take of, okay, I should probably wear a mask. And now seeing all these people without masks, I can tell that people are now a little bit more relaxed about the virus, which, again, you don't have to panic, but Seoul is, again, now getting another wave of an outbreak, and it's really going to come down to how well this one's contained. And for those of you who have been trying to keep up to date with the virus, we know that in Korea, probably partly because of how widely people have been tested, but we've just seen a lot of young adults being carriers of the virus. Or, maybe they were impacted, but not as greatly. Maybe it was just, as much of a flu and they got over it. But the number of confirmed cases in young adults is a very, very big portion within the Korean population. Again, this is partly tied to the fact that Korea has been testing people at a wider variety than, just the ones that are showing the worst symptoms. But, so I walk around and I'm looking at these people and I'm saying, okay, so overall it seems people a little bit more laxed, but now we're seeing these new cases pop up. And in fact, there's a report that PC cafe usage has been back on the rise coming into March. So February was actually when a lot of the initial, I guess, like alarms were going off in Korea, January and February. And now March, like a lot of us, I think, are just kind of used to how things have been in Korea that have been impacted by the virus. And so maybe people are starting to lax up a little bit. People are going to PC cafes more again, where they've seen a harsh drop in February, and then March they're seeing a rise in usage once again. And now you're going to have to just test more people as people use these common services in public areas. Hopefully, it is still well contained. Obviously, Korea has been very active in implementing new structures and new infrastructure every time they have to make sure tests are more readily available, to make sure that they're not as painful to go through in terms of like time and effort. Quarantines have been very active. I mean, certain areas actually have now, so certain regions and certain cities have implemented quarantines and then just like disinfecting entire buildings when it comes to PC cafes, karaoke's, and even academies where students would have been spending a lot of time. So they've shut it down. And because not all of these businesses can afford to do it themselves, the city has put in the funds to quarantine and disinfect the entire buildings and kind of keep them under quarantine for a limited amount of time. So it's very good to see that they're doing this around businesses, not only to like schools and academies and other big, I guess, known businesses, but the PC cafes and karaoke's that are most commonly visited by young adults and young teens as well. And some of the reports are now stating that specifically, saying, hey, we've seen how many young carriers we have and confirmed cases we have, and these are services that are visited greatly by that community. So we want to make sure that there's not, series of outbreaks tied to one location. So we'll have to wait and see. Hopefully it's just, people are more aware of kind of what they're doing and who they might be impacting. Hopefully the kinds of social distancing continues to be active in Korea as well. I would hope to see that. Again, just because flattening the curve doesn't happen because you flattened it for 1 week, right? It needs to be for an extended period of time. I think we're seeing more and more experts try to give more background on how that exactly works, right? Just because you didn't go out this weekend doesn't mean now it's fine to go out the next weekend. We all have a part in where we can help, again, spread this out so that it's slower, and so therefore the people who have to deal on the front lines, both for corona and other health issues that are impacted now by this influx of a new virus, are able to deal with it as best as possible and not be overwhelmed. When it comes to PC cafes, some people still actually do depend on PC cafes for a lot of their services. For instance, like I don't have a printer. Most people don't have a printer at home because you just go print it at a PC cafe or at a FedEx type location or whatnot. But a lot of people don't have certain programs even at home, especially like the elderly. So sometimes I see like people in their mid 50s come into PC cafes like just to get something done, right? Or just to apply for something, or just to use a program because they don't have it at home. And then I'm sure that's the same with some kids as well. Although, again, home PCs and laptops have become much more common than in the past, and PC cafes are now really primarily used for gaming. They always have been, but in the past, I think using them for like even word services and document services were much more common than they are now. So I don't know what will happen in terms of like mandatory quarantines and lockdowns, but hopefully the people who are feeling healthy still practice good hygiene and social distancing when it comes to using these, I guess, communal services, so that we can help flatten the curve. Actually, just in my case, when I had to go print some of my documents where I had to send it over yesterday. So a couple days ago, I went to go print, and so I was wondering, like, okay, do I have to go to a PC cafe? Because I'd kind of rather not, because again, they're in a much more confined space. And so I went to one of like printing services and copy services, a place where they were offering those services. And I went, and as soon as you walk in at the station where you can log in to print stuff, there's like a giant sign that's like, please sanitize your hands and use hand sanitizer before you use the station and afterwards as well. And there's just like this giant bottle of hand sanitizer staring at you in the face. And I was like, okay, well, listen, it's not fail proof, but it's there. And so, I used it, and then I got my print done, came home, washed my hands. So again, awareness overall in Korea has been good. Obviously the efforts have been very, very active, but I don't, even Korea, I don't think can be like, oh, like we're done with it. I would doubt that. And I would think that the caution has to continue. And I hope that Korea, the general population, especially the younger population in Korea, is aware of that as well. So the earlier efforts don't go to waste, so to speak. But that's it for the PC cafes. We've talked a lot about kind of the negative impacts of coronavirus, so a little bit of sunshine to end the podcast would be, most of you might have seen that T1, obviously formerly known as SKT T1, but the T1 team and brand did a charity stream for the coronavirus, and so they were donating to the efforts to fight the coronavirus. And so they had a stream of like all these I guess kind of event streams through their organization. They had like the matches, I guess the show matches with Boxer and the T1 team with on like League of Legends, and they had some other fun things as well. They had other just like fun games that they were streaming, such as Pokemon, and then the AMAs, and they had a full day of streams to contribute to that. And a lot of obviously esports players and organizations have been donating and bringing to light that they can be a positive impact during these times. I would I would be surprised if we didn't see many more organizations and other groups in Korea doing more digitally in terms of whether it's charity streams or just streams where people can hang out so that you're helping, I guess, practice social distancing. I expect to see a lot more of that as we move forward. A lot of TV shows are actually having to change kind of their format, like variety shows, because they can't be filming outside in large groups. And so they've actually had to like limit their production crew and, change outdoor, shows into indoor shows and studio shows. So I think we'll continue to see a lot of that impact in entertainment as well. But I was happy to see that T1 was one of the organizations that kind of took these initiatives, and hopefully we'll see more as we move forward. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's it for the news this week from gaming and esports in Korea. I think the biggest thing, again, is that since the coronavirus is impacting all of us around the world in many similar ways, but also different ways, let's just be kind and supportive to each other. Let's practice what hygiene and distancing we can. And let's always remember that we are quite blessed if you're in the gaming and esports community, that our hobbies can still be enjoyed without too much change during these times. And maybe it's a good way to introduce it to some of your friends in a healthy manner. It's a good way for us to continue enjoying it in a healthy manner. Make sure you play some games with online friends. Maybe go hang out, whether it's in your own stream or your favorite streamer's channel, just to be able to take part in a little bit more interaction and community activity, and stay safe. That's it for The Connection, episode 6. We will return next week, so we'll cross this bridge next time.